With that, we'll begin our webinar today. We'll be joined by Dr. Lauren Pyle from Clemson University. Dr. Pyle will discuss the biology, ecology, and management of Chinese tallow in southeastern forests. This webinar is designed to help woodland owners, foresters, researchers, and concerned citizens learn how to identify Chinese tallow in the forest landscape and discuss potential management options. The title of her webinar is Managing Chinese Tallow in Forests, an Integrated Approach. With that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Pyle.
All right, thank you, David. And thank you all for joining me today. So the main part of the webinar that I'm going to give today is based on some of the research that I've been doing on Chinese tallow for the past 4 years for my PhD dissertation. And that will go into some of the biology, ecology, and then management implications for Chinese tallow. So hopefully it's helpful to a large group of people. And so Chinese tallow tree is an invasive tree species along the southeastern coastal plain. Basically from North Carolina down through Texas, it invades not only bottomland forest conditions and grassland prairies, but also timber sites throughout the south as well. So it makes it an economic issue, not only an ecological issue. So Chinese tallow tree was originally introduced, it was believed by Benjamin Franklin in the early 1800s as an ornamental tree species for because of its beautiful fall foliage. It turns purple, red, and yellow in the fall. It has a really neat fruit that opens up, and it's also called popcorn tree because of how the fruit looks like popcorn. And if you're looking for a great place for distribution maps, EdMaps through UGA is a great place to go, and so that's where this map was taken. So Chinese tallow tree, why is it such a problem in our southeastern forests? It has high reproductive potential. So it can produce fruit at 3 years old under the right conditions. It's able to produce stump sprouts and root sprouts. It also has the ability to produce over 100,000 fruit per mature tree. So it just has this really large reproductive potential. It also makes forest management problematic, as you know, it has a lot of seeds out there in the community. It has a persistent seed bank, so it can the seeds can last for 5 to 7 years under the right conditions. So no matter what your management options that you have for controlling Chinese tallow, it needs to be at least as long as the seed bank. So 5 to 7 years is what you have to sort of plan for at the minimum. It's tolerant to a wide range of abiotic stressors, including saline soil stress. It is intermediate in shade tolerance, and it can withstand flooding conditions, which is why it's able to invade some of our bottomland forest conditions. Because it is a non-native species, it has no real natural enemies here in the United States. And there's some biocontrol work that is actually working on that to help reduce the Chinese tallow infestation. It is bird dispersed, and so bird dispersal helps aid in Chinese tallow seeds reaching new safe sites and increasing the invasion range of Chinese tallow. It is also considered a fire suppressor in the habitats in which it invades, especially in the southeast, which are usually fire-frequent ecosystems. It has rapidly decomposing leaf litter in comparison to our native species, and this basically disrupts the surface fuel loads and renders habitats inflammable. So the bulk of my research on Chinese tallow was actually done on Parris Island Marine Corps base. This is where the male Marines from the Mississippi East come to do boot camp, and the females from all over the United States. So it makes it a really interesting place to work. It also has military objectives into what we were trying to do at Parris Island as well, and I'll get into those in a minute. So let's go through what you need to know about invasive species management. So a lot of times our focus in invasive plant management is just the plant, but we also need to look at the ecosystem characteristics to understand why that plant is invading that ecosystem, how the population is spreading, so is it spreading by birds, is it spreading by deer, what's the reproductive potential, and then the human activities. So what are we doing as humans to actually increase the invasibility, or how easily invaded the community is? And so I wanted to look a little bit more at seed dispersal. As we know from previous research, birds are actively dispersing Chinese tallow seeds. And so when they take them up and desiccate them, they're actually increasing the germination capacity of Chinese tallow seeds. But what was not known is if white-tailed deer are actually dispersing the fruit of Chinese tallow. It's high in lipids, so there is this idea that if there is a large number of white-tailed deer, which there are at Parris Island, if they're actually eating those fruits during the fall and helping to disperse them. What we came to find out was that Chinese tallow is not dispersed by deer, but white-tailed deer were dispersing a lot of other non-native species. And we recently published that last year, if you're interested in learning more. So we also wanted to look at the disturbance and establishment of Chinese tallow in different sort of forest conditions and also under different anthropogenic disturbances, especially forest operations. So at Parris Island, we had this aerial imagery going back to 1939. And what I was able to do was to actually look at forest change through time and look at areas that remained forested in 1939 and still had forest cover in 2011. What this was able to do is we were able to classify remnant forest areas that were always forested, from areas that at one point in time had agricultural abandonment, which was very prevalent on our coastal islands, especially going back to early European settlement. And so what we found was that these disturbed stands there on the left had this highly dense understory of things like yaupon, wax myrtle, and of course Chinese tallow tree, in comparison to our remnant forests on the right, and were more structurally complex, had less Chinese tallow, and had greater species diversity. And so then we also wanted to look at forest thinning practices and also prescribed fire and how they were affecting the establishment of Chinese tallow. And so we were able to use some stem analysis and age ring dating on the Chinese tallow that had established across some of these sites. And we were able to find that forest thinning operations were actually in creating establishment opportunities for Chinese tallow tree. So from this study, we were able to find that, yes, those remnant stands had greater woody species richness, and they had greater diversity between forest stands, which is very characteristic of maritime forests. And these disturbed stands had an increase of shrub density, so that really thick understory of yaupon and wax myrtle. They were dominated by few species, which includes slash pine, yaupon, and wax myrtle, and they had a greater amount of Chinese tallow. And then we found that forest thinning increased Chinese tallow, which creates this forest management issue. So the idea here was that we need to sort of protect our remnant stands and maybe manage them differently than our disturbed stands that have Chinese tallow. And these remnant stands can also provide a feed source, increasing the native species richness in the area. And so I'm going to get a little bit into the integrated management ideas that we came up with at Parris Island to help control Chinese tallow. And this is actually a stand of pretty much pure tallow. So I'm going to give you a little bit of the study background and then how we develop these integrated management options for testing, and then the impacts to Chinese tallow, the impacts to the native community, which is very important to do when you're looking at invasive species management, and then some other management options that are currently out there in the literature or are developing. So in 2010, I was contracted by the Department of Defense to survey Parris Island for invasive species, all invasive species. They have been doing control efforts since 2001, and were primarily using half-and-square herbicide treatments on Chinese tallow. But we needed to identify how effective these treatments were and what sort of future options we had. So just to give you an idea of the survey, in case you're looking to do an invasive species survey yourself, we stratified by the forest stand level. So each forest stand was treated as its own separate thing, and we did a transect survey. And so for this one, I did 135-foot transects, starting in the forest stand, running along the forest stand, and then on each side of me, within 15 feet of this transect, I would record whatever invasive species I found. So we were able to get point data using the Trimble Juno, and we're able to see how the density in the population levels of Chinese tallow throughout Parris Island. And so as you see here, in 2001, they had contracted out a survey prior, and I used similar methods to what they had done before, and in 2010. And the highest priority areas were based on areas with, one, a large density or large population size of Chinese tallow, but also highly reproductive trees. So larger trees were the ones that, of course, we wanted to have the highest priority because they were able to produce a lot of fruit. So for invasive species management, there's this critical need for a practical and effective framework that not only links ecological theory to invasive species management. So where we're not just controlling the invasive tree, we're actually looking at the ecology of the species and also of the system. And so a lot of our weed management approaches actually came from agricultural systems where when you control the invader, you're basically going to have an increase in productivity in your crop species. But that doesn't really account for the complexity of our natural systems, and that's where usually a lot of the control efforts fall through. So in our definition of an integrated management regime or system, it's a system approach. And how we're doing it is we're combining multiple treatment techniques to reduce the infestation size. And in this way, one treatment aids in the application of following treatments, and I'll give more into that in a minute. And then each subsequent treatment is designed to further diminish the infestation size. So we also consider what we're doing sort of an ecologically based approach to the management of Chinese tallow. So we're considering the biology and ecology of the species, which our target species here is Chinese tallow, but we're also considering the ecology of the community. So we're looking at the current and desired structure, composition, and processes that sort of characterize this community. And that's looking at it in current conditions, historical conditions, and what we would like in the future. So we have our target species, and in this case it's Chinese tallow tree. And we have our native species community, which you can see my field technician Stephen in there, and you can see how dense some of these forest stands are. And then we have tools. So in our case, our options were fire, herbicide, and mastication. Now, depending on the species you might have, or the site, you might have different tools that you have available, or you might have a different community. So it's looking at these things at a site level and species level. And so just to give an idea of some of the, give a broad picture of what these communities look like. So we have our slash pine overstory, which is primarily a plantation pine from the 1970s. We have our understory, which is this dense understory of slash pine regeneration, Chinese tallow, Yopon, and wax myrtle are the primary species. And then we, of course, have our wonderful smilax and rubus species. So in our development of an integrated management approach, we had this sort of fully integrated approach where we combine these treatments based on the biology and ecology of Chinese tallow. And so that included mechanical mastication, followed by herbicide, and then followed by a growing season prescribed fire. And I'm going to go more into that in here in a second. So in the spring, as non-structural carbohydrates are moving up from the roots into the above portion of the tree to produce things like leaves and flowers, this is the best time to come in to masticate the stand and to target Chinese tallow in particular. But in our case, because mastication is a broadly applicable treatment, we're basically masticating the entire understory. And so the idea here is that as those non-structural carbohydrates are moving up through the roots, you're sort of eliminating the capacity for the tree to resprout. And so the mastication was also to reduce the understory shrub density in general. So like I said, it had a very dense Yopon and wax myrtle. And so by doing this mastication in the understory, we're able to increase the accessibility to apply herbicides. Anyone that's tried to apply herbicides in these really dense stands, you'll understand why. It's very hard to get in there. On the right shoulder of Stephen there, that's actually a Chinese tallow. And so it's really hard to climb in there with a backpack sprayer to actually effectively get that tree. So the idea here is that that mastication helps open it up, helps us to be able to target the Chinese tallow. And then also to help promote fire spread. So these really dense stands, there's not a lot of oxygen that's able to get in there. And so hopefully mastication would help promote fire spread as well. And so in the summer, you know, the root sprouts are still going to be able to regenerate. So we'll get regeneration from root sprouts, such as root suckers or stump sprouts. And then also we have that soil seed bank, which I said earlier can be up to 7 years. So we'll have to be able to come back and control that somehow. So the idea is that that same fall, and so we did the spring mastication in the same year of that fall, as the non-structural carbohydrates are moving from the leaves to the below ground portion for dormancy, we come back in with a foliar application of herbicide, and that will help translocate it down into the rootstock. So hopefully that will, again, peel out or deplete the residual carbohydrates that are in that rootstock as well. And so 2 years later, we come back with a growing season prescribed fire. We chose 2 years later because we wanted the mulch layer at Parris Island to decompose enough so that we could use prescribed fire. Sometimes when you have a thick layer of mulch, fire won't readily burn through it because of the way that mulch stacks. It doesn't get enough oxygen for fire to go through, and it also can be very moist and wet. So we waited 2 years for decomposition to help us out a little bit, and also for that residual slash pine overstory to help build up a needle layer, and then also some of that native species to help carry some fire as well. So we chose growing season prescribed fire once again because of that carbohydrate translocation in the growing season, and so we chose May as our application for prescribed fire. And so we compared that to other treatment options. So we used mastication and just herbicide. And for our foliar application, we used a 5% volume-to-volume Garland 4 Ultra with water and a blue dye indicator so we could see where we applied the herbicide. And so then we also tested that against a herbicide fire application. So we know that mastication can be cost prohibitive. We were lucky that we were working on a Department of Defense military base and that they were able to get a cat mulcher, but that might not always be the case in other systems or situations. So we wanted to see if we could have similar effects without using a mastication treatment. And so in this treatment, we used a basil bark or hack and squirt application of 25% volume-to-volume Garland 4 with methylated seed oil, and then also that growing season prescribed fire. And so then we wanted to compare to typical methods of control. So this is sort of our baseline, and our typical methods were what Parris Island had been using in the past, which is that hack and squirt basil bark application of foliar herbicide. So this is the only treatment that happened in this sort of treatment type. And so we were comparing all of our other treatments to this particular treatment. And so just to give an overview of the study design, I'm not going to get into too much detail into the statistics or how we operated the study. If you have any questions about that, you can certainly contact me later. So we have those 4 treatment types: the mastication, herbicide, and fire, mastication and herbicide, herbicide and fire, and then herbicide only. We had 8 replicates, and so that resulted in 32 experimental units that were actually placed throughout Parris Island. And so just to give you, again, some of the timing. So we have that mastication treatment that happened in the spring of 2013, and we had a pre-survey treatment to that, pre-treatment survey prior to that. And then we remeasured in 2013 what happened following mastication. And then we did our foliar and dormant stem applications in the fall and winter of 2013. And then we did a survey thereafter. And then we did our fire treatment in the spring of 2015, so just last year. And then we did a follow-up survey thereafter. So let's look at the impacts of Chinese tallow based on these integrated treatments. So you can see that we had a range of about 400 to 1,000 stems per acre of Chinese tallow, depending on our treatment type, and those are all non-significant, so all fall in the realm. And then basal areas of about 10 to 19 square feet per acre. And then regeneration was similar, about 1% of the regeneration. And so when we look at the effect of mastication, so of course you would think if you masticate the entire understory, you're going to have a significant reduction in Chinese tallow, which is what we saw. We saw that, you know, we had quite a few number of stems in 2012, and then in 2013 we had a significant reduction. And you can see from the picture here, it creates a pretty dramatic effect. And so we also looked at the effect of mastication on our regeneration, and we actually did have a positive increase. So you can see from this picture here that those are all seeds and also sprouts from Chinese tallow, root sprouts from Chinese tallow. We did have an increase, but it was non-significant from our 2012 baseline data. So then we wanted to look at the effect of prescribed fire. And if you were on the coast of South Carolina last year, you would know that it was actually a very, very wet spring. We had 14 inches of rain in April, and as I mentioned, we did the prescribed fires in May. So you can see we actually had standing water. The duff was pretty wet, so our fire actually stayed below 200 degrees Celsius. So it was actually pretty cool fires. We believe that the impacts would have been much greater if we would have had hotter fires. But you got to do what you've got to do when you have it. So we did see that there was a reduction in Chinese tallow density in 2015 following the prescribed fire, and that was both in the herbicide fire treatment and also the mastication herbicide fire treatment. So we had significant reductions there. And this picture is actually from a herbicide fire treatment that did not have the mastication prior. And you can see that this is actually from the area that was able to get the hottest. So let's look at the overall effects of the integrated treatments on Chinese tallow. So this is looking at the data through all of the years. And what we see that we have on our y-axis here, we have the log density of trees, so stems, in this case it's per hectare, and then we have our survey year. So we look at 2012, we're all about the same. And then we can see the effects of mastication here in 2013 in reducing Chinese tallow density. And then we can see that in 2014 we actually do start getting a little bit of an increase here in the mastication stands because of that sprouting that typically occurs after mastication. But then we start to see these separations in 2015 where our herbicide treatment is the highest, followed by a mastication herbicide treatment. Herbicide fire, so you see the effect of fire here in 2015. And then the one that had the greatest impact was our mastication herbicide fire treatment. And so if we look at regeneration, so we have regeneration here on the Y and then again here on the X. And in 2012 we had no significant differences in Chinese tallow regeneration, although there is that higher mastication herbicide, but there's no treatments yet. And then we see that there is an increase after our mechanical treatment, our mastication treatment in regeneration. Following 2014, you can see that that effect of mastication actually leaves a residual impact on the amount of regeneration in these treatment types. But in 2015, we actually have no differences in regeneration across any of the treatment types, so they're all about the same. So if we look at our overall effects, we see that for at least for regeneration, we actually have a significant impact of mastication. And what that is that there's actually an increase in regeneration due to mastication. And so you can see that effect here. And then we also have a significant impact of fire on the density of Chinese tallow tree. So fire actually helps to reduce Chinese tallow tree in these treatments. And then if we look at the overall effect of our fully integrated treatment, mastication, herbicide, and fire, we actually have a significant decrease in Chinese tallow, which you can see by the log density up here. And so just to give you some numbers again, so remember in 2012, we started with about 400 to 1,000 stems per acre. And I apologize, I forgot to change the units over here on the left, but it's actually in acres right now. And then by 2015, we actually see reductions to 22 in the mastication herbicide fire treatment to 160 in the mastication herbicide treatment. So no matter what treatment that we did, we see a pretty large reduction in Chinese tallow. It's just which one was the most effective. And that's where we're seeing that mastication herbicide fire, that integrated treatment was the most effective at reducing Chinese tallow density. And so just to review, the mastication treatments were significant in increasing the regeneration of Chinese tallow over all of the survey years. And then the fire treatments were significant at reducing the density of Chinese tallow, both in the masticated and non-masticated treatment types. And then that masticated herbicide fire treatment had a significantly greater impact on Chinese tallow density than all other treatment types. All right, so now let's look at the impacts to the community. The thing often about invasive species management is that we're not often looking at the impacts to the native community, and that was one thing that we really wanted to focus on because that was actually part of our project objectives. So the ecological resistance in the community is sort of like this idea where it's the capacity of an ecological community to resist invasion. And this has been documented in sort of ideas such as increased native species richness will help increase the ecological resistance, or having a large suite of functional traits, so large functional diversity in an ecosystem will also help increase ecological resistance. So in our way of trying to do this was trying to build ecological resistance through increasing native species diversity, particularly in the understory, and then hopefully also increasing functional diversity by increasing the species out there that are actually well adapted to frequent fire regimes. So the southern pine ecosystems are usually characterized by this open savanna type community with this highly diverse understory. And this is not Parris Island, this is actually the Brosnan Forest in Dorchester, South Carolina. If you've been there, it's an amazing place. But they have this great landscape that they've been able to burn quite frequently, and it actually does not have many invasive species because of how well it's been managed through time. So we kind of wanted to create this open understory, and not only for the purpose of increasing native species diversity, but also because it helps for military training objectives. At Parris Island, a lot of them are running through the forest understory for practicing military training. So part of our goal was to also help with that particular objective as well. And it also helps for increasing the wildlife habitat. Parris Island wants to reintroduce wild turkey and also fox squirrels to Parris Island, and currently the habitat does not allow for that. And so if we just look at the overall effects to the community, we see that mastication did, of course, result in a significant decline in the density of trees at Parris Island. So you can see the differences between the treatments there. It also was significant in reducing the density of our saplings and shrubs of our species that were out there as well. And then if we look, fire actually had no significant results in terms of the density of our trees or saplings. However, our mastication herbicide and fire treatment, combining mastication, and fire had a significant impact on our density of trees and shrubs. And so then we wanted to look at the ground floor species diversity through time in effect from our treatments. We have species richness over here on the Y, and then here again on the X. And as you can see that by the end, by 2015, most of our treatments were actually insignificant, but we actually had a positive increase in our mastication, herbicide, and fire treatment in terms of increasing native species richness. And so just to overview, mastication treatments were significant at reducing tree density, but the mastication, herbicide, and fire was also significant. And once again, here's a picture of how drastic that can be. Hunter is over here on the right-hand side, and you can actually see that wall of green is where it was not masticated. And then, of course, inside our experimental unit there, that's where it was masticated. And then our mastication treatments were significant at reducing the shrub density and basal area. And then, again, that mastication, herbicide, and fire treatment also reduced the density and basal area of our shrubs. And our mastication, herbicide, and fire treatment was the only treatment that actually was significantly different than our other treatments in increasing the ground floor richness. And you can see we still have some Chinese tallow sprouts out there. So overall, the mastication, herbicide, and fire treatment was had the greatest reduction in Chinese tallow density and the greatest increase in herbaceous diversity. And so our objectives were to determine the most effective option to reduce Chinese tallow, and we found that that mastication, herbicide, and fire treatment was the most effective, and we believe that's because this was an integrated treatment regime which combined the biology and ecology of Chinese tallow and also the ecology of the community in terms of this frequent fire sort of system. And so we want to determine the treatment effect of native species abundance and diversity. And mastication resulted in these this particular data I don't have presented here, but we did see a positive increase for oak species, but reduced the density of sapling slash pine. The mastication did increase the regeneration of slash pine, but fire decreased regeneration. So mastication opened up exposed the bare mineral soil for an increase in regeneration of slash pine, but the fire, because slash pine is sensitive when it's young, actually decreased that regeneration. And then the mastication, herbicide, and fire treatment increased herbaceous species richness. And so we also wanted to promote native species diversity, open that forest structure, and promote ecosystem function through frequent prescribed burning, which is characteristic of southern pine ecosystems. And that mastication, herbicide, fire treatment increased our herbaceous ground flora, reduced that shrub density, and created that open forest condition, and has allowed for better conditions for frequent prescribed fire. And we believe that frequent prescribed fire, because Chinese tallow is a thin bark species, may continue to reduce the Chinese tallow density at Parris Island, and hopefully to help increase community richness by using this historically adapted process for species that are well evolved with frequent prescribed fire. So moving forward, we still need more fire, so we are actually doing another prescribed fire treatment here this May, and we will have more results on the native species community and also the effects of Chinese tallow. There are some limitations to our fire results. As I said, we did the prescribed fires in May of last year, and we surveyed it in August, so that's only a few months worth of data. So there's still some limitations to that data. Being that it was so recent and also not long-term. And so for that, we actually need continued monitoring of these treatment effects at Parris Island. And so here are some other options that are out there for the management of Chinese tallow. And so herbicides, injection methods appear to be more effective than foliar applications. And in our particular study, when we came back with the foliar application of Chinese tallow tree, particularly for large-stemmed species, such or large-stemmed individuals, the herbicide application after the sprouting, the sprouts didn't produce enough foliar area for the herbicide to be at a high enough concentration based on that foliar application to actually kill the residual rootstock. So we're still seeing sprouting on some large individuals thereafter. Garland 3 and Garland 4 may not provide consistent control of sprouting. This paper came out after we had already done our work at Parris Island, and that was Stephen Inlow. And Clearcast may provide very herbicide-specific application for Chinese tallow, and this has great applications for foliar applications, particularly aerial applications of herbicide. And I know it's been done on the coast of South Carolina and in other applications as well. However, it's pretty costly, so it can be cost prohibitive at times. And so Dr. Wheeler and associates at the Invasive Plant Research Lab are actually developing biocontrols for Chinese tallow tree, and they're pretty far along. And they have this Bacasia flea beetle, which the adults can cause significant damage through leaf feeding. And the larvae are actually the most damaging by burrowing into the roots and completely hollowing out the internal tissues. And so they're on the final phases of the test trials for this. And they're also testing a defoliating caterpillar, and this one and both of these are looking to be very safe biological controls of Chinese tallow. And he should have more information out soon, but if you're interested in contacting him, his email address is there. And then so what as foresters are we to do about having Chinese tallow in our forests? So there's many studies out there that show forest management activities such as thinning and harvest can increase Chinese tallow invasion in several forest types, including bottomland hardwoods. And if seed sources are in the area, there has to be a plan to manage after any sort of forest management operation. So in our system, where we have a pine overstory and we can use frequent prescribed fire, that's what we would use. It's a little bit different of when you're having a bottomland hardwood area with Chinese tallow invasion, so that would have to be, sort of site-specific on what you're going to use to control Chinese tallow. And then also artificial regeneration, so planting highly competitive species such as pines might help to reduce invasion by increasing the competitiveness within that site. And although Chinese tallow has poor form, which prohibits most lumber applications, so getting a logger to actually touch tallow might be difficult, but in mixed hardwood stands it could be harvested without affecting the quality of things like structural flake board. And it has low density and light wood color, so it could be used in composite panel construction. So it could be used for things such as pallets, furniture, paneling, or medium density fiberboard. So there are some economic uses out there, but they are very limited. And so for my particular research, I just want to thank my funding support, which is the DoD and the Army Corps of Engineers, and then my PhD committee, which is Jeff Long, Pat Layton, Tom Waldrop of the Forest Service, Joan Walker at the Forest Service, and Billy Bridges here at Clemson, and my three technicians, Stephen, Hunter, and Matthew. And then I wouldn't be here without the help of the natural resource guys at Parris Island Marine Corps Base, and that's John Holloway, Van Horton, and Charles Pickney. They're the ones that were out there doing the mastication treatments with me and helped with the fire treatments as well. So they're very much a part of this project. And with that,
all right,
I'll take any questions.
Dr. Pyle for a great presentation.
Yay.